Hello, I'm Karen Gomyo, and this is Living the Classical Life.
I'm Jolt Bognar, host of Living the Classical Life, and I'm so glad you're here. Today we speak with violinist Karen Gomyo, who tells of a performance she attended as a child that would influence her own path to becoming a musician. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for being here on the show, Living the Classical Life. It's just a delight to meet you here. I know that you're between travels during the middle of the pandemic here, and we're just grateful to have your time.
Pleasure.
One of the things that constantly fascinates me about the life of a musician is how we find our calling, because it's not just deciding that we want to play music, or in some cases that seems like a really inevitable thing from early age, that you might come from a musical family, but you choose music, or it chooses you. You choose an instrument, and there are very specific reasons for that. But then we also realize that this is something that is all-consuming. It's really our calling. But I wonder how that happens. I know that you started from a very early age. Did you come from a musical family?
Actually, no. My mother is a visual artist, and I grew up with a single mom, actually, so it was just the two of us. And she, I think, saw that I was always humming and singing since I was a baby, since before I could speak words. And so she, took note of that, excuse me, and a friend of hers told her, yeah, I think your daughter likes music. So I think that from my mother's perspective, she would have been happy for me to do anything at all, anything that I loved, anything that I chose. And when I was younger, I did a mix of violin, karate, and ballet.
I don't think I've ever heard those three things in the same sentence, but I think it's awesome.
Yeah, so I think, there was always a bit of a tomboy part of me, and then there was always a part of me that was very much a dreamer, with a huge imagination, and I think music triggered that immediately from a very, very young age. And I used to even line up my stuffed animals, against the wall, and I would stand up on a dinner table while my mom was cooking, and I would sing to my stuffed animals. So I think that sort of love of sharing music was always sort of innate. But why the violin? So that was actually because violinist Midori, who at the time was 14 years old, came through Montreal to give her debut with the Montreal Symphony. And, as a 5-year-old looking up at a 14-year-old, you think, wow, this big girl, I want to be like her, And I remember she played the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. The music itself was just so beautiful. And I also remember very much her concentration and her devotion, and the sort of oneness that she represented together with this gorgeous music was just something that immediately captivated me. And I thought, I'd love to be like her.
So if that drew you in, and of course the Mendelssohn Concerto is, it's understandable that that would immediately magnetize you, but did you feel at that point, okay, I want to be like her and music sounds great. Mm-hmm. Did you actually also feel that that would be what you would do in life?
It's a good question. I think, as a kid, you're not thinking about what life will bring, and you're not thinking about the practicalities of what it means to pursue your dreams and your goals and so on. I remember very much loving the idea of performing, and somehow the idea of teaching, even though I don't know where that came from. It was just, I think, just somehow always related to the idea of sharing. But when I say that I wanted to be like Midori, I do think it had, also to do with the performance element. It was also beautiful seeing her in this gown. I can't remember what color it was, but as a little girl, all those things combined, I think it was just really inspiring. I had never seen. At the young age of 5, right? I had never seen up to that point in my life anything like that, anything that spoke to me in such a complete way.
I'm just trying to consider all the elements. So I'm hearing music and ballet and karate. Those are some courageous and even bold pursuits. And I'm wondering, did you always feel yourself to be a theatrical personality? Did you feel like you belonged on stage? Yes, it's one thing to see it modeled for you.
Right,
but did you
right.
feel like, I can do that, I want to do that, and I have to?
I don't think I had such a determination like I had to be a performer. And I wouldn't say that I'm a theatrical person. I'm certainly not now. I think I'm rather shy and introverted. But I think, as a child, you sort of, you don't know fear yet. And so I think this idea of being on stage and performing, I think it's just, you don't think about it. Or I didn't think about it as anything more than what it is, that you're playing in front of people. And I think for me, it wasn't so much about the being on stage, but it's much more about the music. Because I remember when I started then with the Suzuki method, I remember,
Suzuki.
Yeah, I remember every now and then there were one or two pieces that I thought were so beautiful. And I remember one piece. I wish I remember what piece it was exactly, but. It was in, I think, the first Suzuki book or something. Very, very simple, very short. And I thought it was so sad. And I remember when my mother had her friends over, I would play this cassette tape over and over. I would rewind it and I would play it and sort of observing the adults like, do they not feel what I feel? So for me, it was very much the music that was first and foremost. And if that could be sort of performed and, shared with an audience, I think that's where it came from.
I heard you talking earlier about the fact that you were, as a personality type, a dreamer, and I'm always curious about how an artist today, or a musician, whatever that looks like, how a musician fits into today's world with its practical realities. Can you continue from being an idealistic dreamer as a child and navigate through this life, continuing that sense of wonder? Do you feel like that still is possible for you in your life today?
Wow, that's a big question. And it's a very important question, I think. I think it was Violinist Menuhin who said that it's so important to pursue your profession with all your dedication, but to keep that passion of an amateur. And I think, obviously, you know very well that pursuing music as a career, there are just so many things involved, The journey itself in the career path, you're constantly being examined, you're self-critical, you've got all these things that can blind you, or that can make you forget the reason why you started this in the first place. And I think I've definitely gone through that in phases. And what's always brought me back is the reminder of my firm belief that, well, first of all, my love for music, that never wavers, but also my firm belief of the power of music, simply. And in order for that music to be as pure and as organic, or as true as possible also to yourself as a performer, you have to somehow find ways to let go of any sort of negative voice in your head that may come from outside influences or from yourself. And so I think it's in a way, it's as you go through life and as you pack on more and more experience, I think it's so it becomes even more important to really try to stay in tune with that inner child, which carries that sense of imagination and dreaminess, and to be reminded of like, even when I listen to music, I want to be moved. I want to be transported. And yet, of course, because I'm a performer myself, and when I practice, I'm not transporting myself. I'm being very analytical and very critical in the practice room. And so, of course, over time, you do start to listen to music generally in a different way. But I always try to bring myself back to the place where I can simply be the receiver without the analytical mind starting to, turn on.
I was so fascinated by what you said about finding our authentic selves, what is true to our calling. I've always wondered about the fact that, yes, we maintain that idealism, that inner child, but at the same time, if we're seeking out our opportunities, there are really specific landmarks that I don't want to say have to happen, but maybe there's a certain amount of planning that has to go into it. I mean, if we trace your trajectory, so you were born in Tokyo, you grew up in Montreal, and then at some point you moved to New York to study with Dorothy DeLay at Juilliard. At what point did that enter in your... I mean, did you feel like, I have to do that? It's a thing, she's the best teacher, a musician has to go to Juilliard. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I do. I think I remember this very well because the reason I even met Miss DeLay was accidental. I mean, as I said, I started with the Suzuki method, and I think when I was about 8 or 9, my mother and I traveled to Japan on a summer break. And during that time, my Suzuki teacher had sent in a tape, I think a videotape of me playing, from a Christmas concert or what have you, to the Suzuki Teachers Conference Association, which was preparing a masterclass for the Suzuki Teachers Conference, which was to be held in Chicago the following year, where Miss DeLay was going to be the invited guest pedagogue. And for that occasion, they chose 10 kids out of all of North America, so America, the U.S. and Canada. And so unbeknownst to me, my teacher had sent in a tape of me playing, and my tape was one of the 10 chosen. And what was really great as well is that one of my best friends who was also learning the violin, his tape got chosen too. So we got to go to Chicago together with our mothers. And that's how I met Miss DeLay, is that I played for her then. I was 9 or 10. And up until that point, the violin music was just a passion of mine, just a hobby. It was never intended from a young age that I would follow this path. I hadn't come from that sort of background. My mother didn't know what a career in music would mean or anything like that. So that wasn't at all on our minds. It was really that encounter with Miss DeLay, with Dorothy DeLay, who said, if you want to come study with me, I'll give you a full ride. Come to Juilliard. And so that was really the pivotal moment where I think, my mom said to me, how much do you love the violin? How much do you want to do this? And all I was thinking about was Miss DeLay. She was the teacher of Midori.
Right.
You know?
Oh, so it came full circle, kind of.
Yeah. And so, of course, I want to study with her if it means I can be like Midori. You know, and I'm not thinking about what that's going to mean. I'm just simply thinking, oh, I love Midori. I love the violin. Oh, this is the teacher. That's exciting. Let's do it. You know, that was really, it was very innocent. And my mother just wanted to support me in whatever I chose to do in life. And so she just said, you know, if this is what you choose, first of all, stick to it. And let's go for it.
I'm curious to know just a little bit more about Miss DeLay.
Yeah.
On this show, I love the chance to hear people's stories because we love to sort of demystify the legends, to sort of humanize the experience of what it was like to work with them, rather than just knowing them as a name. One impression that I've had from hearing people talking about her teaching is that she really encouraged the individualism of her students. I mean, she had a lot of them, and there were so many diverse artists and musical voices. What was it like for you? I mean, you arrived there in New York. What was your first impression? What was she like as a person, just walking into the room?
She was a very warm lady. She was like a grandmother figure to me. She had that kind of aura. And she always called you sugar plum, sweetie pie. Yeah, sugar plum was I think her favorite way of calling her students. That's certainly what she called me. And she was very wise. You know, I think with her, I felt at once protected and at the same time intimidated. It was a very interesting combination because I just had this feeling of, oh, grandma, you know, like wanting to run up to her and get a hug from her. And on the other hand, there was underneath her warmth, there was also this very kind of severe, I don't know if severe is the word, but she was very much, her approach to teaching, I think, was one of always, first of all, wanting to be positive, that she believed students would excel from a place of, yes, I can do this. I'm excited about this. I'm excited to learn this new thing, rather than it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And so there was this. On the other hand, I think she was teaching through her actions very much the reality in life after school, which is that, you know, when you're given an opportunity, you better do your best because you might not be given a second chance. And she demonstrated this through the way she scheduled your lesson. And that's a funny way to put it, but let me explain. So, for example, it was silently understood that if you played well, if you showed that you were improving, if she felt that there was really something there in your playing and in your attitude also towards your practicing and what you presented to her, that she would want to see you more often. So if I was getting weekly lessons, sometimes even twice a week, then I knew that I was doing well. I remember one time I went in there and I was having a bad day, or I wasn't prepared enough, or I was too nervous or something like that, and it didn't go well. Honey, sugar plum, that's very good. Okay, well, why don't you, work on this some more? I'll see you in 2 weeks, or I'll see you in 3 weeks. And so I don't want to say that it was a punishment, but I think it was just a way to reset me, like, okay, I need to get my stuff together, and when I come in next time in my lesson, it better have met the standard of what she expects from me.
Do you think that she was also, in some way, maybe allowing you more time to consider what needed to happen? I mean, if you understood even at that age that, okay, maybe that didn't go so hot, what would you tell yourself to try to rework what had happened? Mm-hmm. Did that mean more time at the instrument? Did that mean more time away from the instrument thinking about the music? Or
yeah.
For someone at that age, yeah. I mean, that seems like a lot of reflection already.
It is. I think, thinking back at that age, I think it was more, that was a period of practicing as much as possible. So for me, I'd go to school during the day, I'd come home, practice first, then do my homework, then go to sleep, and then the next day begins. And so when a lesson didn't go well, and Miss DeLay would say, I'll see you in 2 or 3 weeks, I think it just made me work harder. It made me want to make sure that when I go in there next time, that she's seen a clear improvement. And I should also say that, she would give these exercises to her students. I'm not sure if she gave them to all her students, but certainly to me. I think she really had a very strong belief in the capacity of a child, to learn things quickly. And she believed that needed to be trained as well, to take advantage of that kind of sponginess that a child has in his or her brain. And so she would, I remember the first time she did this to me, I think I was 12. She called me, we were in Aspen, at the Aspen Music Festival. She called and said, Sugar Plum, have you played the Tchaikovsky Waltz Scherzo? Do you know it? No, I don't. Okay, well, go listen to it and tell me if you like it. Learn to listen to it. Yeah, I like it. Okay, well, Sugar Plum, learn it, memorize it, and bring it to me by this Friday. And I think it was like Tuesday or Wednesday or something. And so I did that. And if you don't know the piece, it's quite virtuosic. And
yes, not an easy one, is my guess.
Not an easy one, and not too long. I think 6-7 minutes or something like that. But I had a couple of days to learn it. So it's a piece that I had never learned, and to bring it to her memorized. But the thing is, I managed. This is the thing. I think she really had so much faith in the brain of a child and in the will of a child to be able to tackle such a task. And so I brought it to her, and she said, "Oh, very good, well done." She said, "Well, there's a benefit concert in a few days or in a week or something. I would love for you to play this piece."
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing. I think children, speaking for myself anyway, I wasn't thinking about anything. It just was what I was meant to do. I was given this assignment. I didn't question it. I think now if somebody said, "Hey, can you memorize a new concerto and bring it, tomorrow or something," I would think about it, and I would say, "Ooh, but this would entail this and this and that, and realistically this and this and that." But as a child, at that age, this was my teacher, Miss DeLay. She assigned me something, I just did it. And I always had the reference of Midori, for example, who was famous for also, having this kind of vigorous training as a child. And so I always looked up to that as an inspiration of what's possible and what should be possible. But yeah, that was my first sort of such training that Miss DeLay gave me. And then it sort of evolved into, I remember the next big one for me was when she called me when I was 15 at home and said, "Do you know the Glazunov Concerto?"
Oh,
I said,
yeah.
"No, I don't." "All right. Learn the whole thing, memorized in, I can't remember, 3 or 5 days, but regardless.
3 or 5 days.
Like very, very little time. And I did it. It's just how she just gave me these sorts of assignments, and we went through a period in the first few years of just going through one concerto after another. And obviously we never went into depth until we took this concerto back a second time. But I think the initial goal that she had in mind was just get this child to learn as much repertoire as possible, as quickly as possible. And it was her way of also training this ability to learn quickly because, again, I think she was thinking ahead to life after school, which is when you do have a career, people always cancel. There's always going to be a cancellation. And if you get a phone call, and it did happen once, where a soloist for Tchaikovsky concerto got canceled, and they needed somebody tomorrow, and I remember this very clearly. I was still at school at NEC, and I actually hadn't played Tchaikovsky in 8 years at that point, but I was just so trained in my mind to be able to say, "Oh yeah, that's that's doable. And so I said yes. And after having said yes, I sort of thought to myself, well, is that really possible? Because now I was a little bit older. And so that sort of doubtful voice was asking this question, is that really possible? But once the orchestra confirmed that they did want me, I just had to do it.
I'm fascinated about what you're explaining in terms of which processes and which aspects of our musical lives we do or don't think about. We were talking about identity earlier. I'm fascinated by the fact that violinists seem to be, okay, if you're listening to a Heifetz, you're listening to Chrysler, these are musical voices that you can't mistake one from the other. So if really there is such a direct link between who you feel you are, musically speaking, was finding your own voice something that you were consciously trying to shape, or did you just one day come to an awareness that this is where it had developed? Do you understand? Were you trying to shape this? Were you listening and say, this violinist has that aspect that I would love to integrate into my playing, and let's practice with that in our ear?
Yeah.
Or maybe there's some other aspects that just become your sound.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think it's a combination of different things, or for me it was, in the sense that, again, bringing Miss DeLay into the picture, what I loved about her is that she would never say, this piece has to be played like this. She was much more about teaching you how to ask yourself questions. And so for me, as a young student of hers, she would say, listen to as many recordings as possible and take note of what it is you like. For instance, take a particular phrase, listen to, let's say, 5, 6, 7 different versions. If there's one that speaks to you in that particular phrase, take note of why that is. What is it? Is it the sound? Is it the vibrato? Is it the phrasing? Is it the tempo? Is it the feeling that this person puts into it? And so this was, I think, for me, a big part of my sort of development was listening to as many recordings as possible. And once I started doing that, of course, I discovered the world of former violinists that were unfortunately no longer living by the time I was studying to become a violinist. And there I'm talking about David Oistrakh, Schering, Gomyo, Huberman, Ellman, Francescatti, all those guys. And this is a world that I just really got stuck in terms of, this is where I got my information of what is the ideal violinist, in terms of having such a strong sense of identity. Because I would say all of those violinists, like you were saying, you could listen to a few notes and say, oh, that's unmistakably, Menuhin, or that's unmistakably Heifetz. And I won't lie, there was a phase I tried to imitate them, or I tried to copy them. Very quickly learned it's impossible. Yeah. It's impossible. But it was a good training in terms of trying to tap into somebody's way of feeling something, or somebody's way of expressing something. So I think, growing up, I experimented with this sort of approach. If there was a point, though, where I felt like I do have and can have confidence in my voice, let's say, that came a lot later, to be honest. And I think to an extent I'm still in search of it, and I think that goes hand in hand with, my personal development as a person, simply, and that's constantly evolving, and so I don't have a sense of having arrived.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, in either me as a person or me as a musician. I think it gets more and more defined, and I certainly have my values that I'm very clear about. But as far as a sense of arrival, I don't think, I think this is just simply, what it means to be human and to be an artist is that it's about the journey. It's not about the destination.
So if that's a process that's constantly evolving, I'm wondering how that relates to stage for you. Were you always... I look at performers who play on a high level, and I feel that they've really been able to zero in on what it takes to find their zone. Was this something that came naturally to you at an early age, or was this something that you really had to work at?
I think this has evolved over time. When I was younger, I didn't question anything or much. I just walked on stage. I think I had nerves every now and then, but I didn't question much. And I think also, I remember even in my 20s, I would say, I remember in my teens going through some period where I felt a little more afraid somehow. But ultimately, once I found myself on stage, I was able to shut off any sort of nerves or any sort of negative distraction that I may have been feeling backstage. I remember at some point in my 20s, I felt quite relaxed about the whole thing somehow, but that didn't last, you know. I think now it's about and you know, and I have to admit, I think we live in a very challenging time right now. We have a massive amount of distraction. I mean, we often joke about the 6-second attention span that we, you know, compete against a goldfish.
Tchaikovsky, goldfish.
But you know, I mean, we joke about it, but I think there's an element of truth in that, and I think there's an element of danger in that as well. Just, you know, that we live in a time of social media and all those things where it's designed to distract you as much as possible. And what we feed our mind with is what our mind becomes. And so the more you sort of let yourself get pulled into this direction of where the world is at right now with technology and so on, the more you kind of have to find a way to pull yourself out of that. At least for me, that's how it's felt. And you know, we've recently been in a funny period in the pandemic where it's been us and the computer or the phone. You know, it's been our go-to gadget in order to be able to talk to friends, to family, to hear a concert, to watch a concert. And I think this sense of, like, for me anyway, the sense of my space, my silence, my element, this has been sort of challenged, can you say? How to find that balance between this kind of noisy, you know, kind of me sort of signals you're getting from these gadgets versus this very composed, calm place you need to be as a performer to tap into your flow. I don't know if we're digressing here, but
That's exactly what I'm looking for, how you find your flow.
yeah. So I'm experimenting with this a little bit right now. I mean, I've always been spiritual in the sense that I've always been open to the idea that there is a flow of energy around us, and that if something doesn't feel right inside, like if you know, whether it's nerves or anxiety or whatever it is, that it's the sense that some sort of vibrations are not quite in line in the way that they should be. And so actually it was my mother who had introduced me to the idea of yoga, qigong, meditation from a very young age. I mean, I think I was in my very early teens.
So the inner strength of the artist, the resilience that's required. One thing that I've tried to be really mindful of is when I present guests on this show and I look at the list of their accomplishments, is to be really aware of what gets them through any challenges that come up, as inevitably they do. Does your capacity for thoughtfulness, for reflection about the bigger picture, does that account for what has gotten you through any of those times?
I think I've never been somebody who's craved the spotlight, and it's a funny thing to say because as a soloist, the spotlight is what you get. But that's never been something that I thrived on. For me, it was always much more important that I'm happy with the quality of you know, the music that I make. and the respect that you know that I share with my colleagues. And that's sometimes something that I have to remind myself of because of the very fast pace in which other people are taking things. And sometimes it can be a confusing experience to ask yourself, well, should I be doing that too? For example, you know, the pandemic as an example, I think everybody's reaction was very different initially to the pandemic. And I definitely noticed that some of my colleagues were very quick to jump to you know, making videos of just needing to share, you know, to continue performing, which I completely respect. And then the other extreme was me, where I just thought, gosh, what is going on in the world? And what is the meaning of life? And what is the meaning of what I do? And I sort of just had to pause. And the last thing I wanted to do was be in front of a camera performing, even though, of course, I also recognize very much that these performances were also speaking to a certain public that needed to hear music. You know, I know that there were people that were waiting, that were craving to hear performances. You know, the general public that wanted the music to sort of keep them going through a difficult time. So, but in other words, it just threw me into this kind of very, very reflective place of just wanting to take a pause for me to get even more clarity on what this is really about, what music is really for, and what my career means to me, and what I'd like to do with it. And I had a very wonderful set of conversations with the conductor Semyon Bychkov, who said, among many incredible things, he said, you know, life is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I thought, wow, thank you for that, because that's how I've always pursued my life. That's how I've always pursued my career. I've always been very, very slow, very steady, but making sure that my values are always intact as I move forward, and not be sidetracked by any moments of sort of, you know, potential flash or I don't know. And that's just my personality, you know. But there have been moments, to go back to your question, where I've had to re-ask myself these questions to make sure that I'm still true to myself in that regard.
And Karen, I'm so curious to know, in conclusion, how do you recharge your artistic energies? What inspires you these days?
Yeah, so I think those are also questions that I thought a lot about during the pandemic. You know, it's like when you're running and running and running, and then suddenly you stop. And at first you're sort of catching your breath, and then you stop, and then you realize, my goodness, that running, that took a lot of energy. It was a lot of forward movement and momentum. And that's a little bit how I felt when I found myself at home for such a long stretch of time, and looking back at what I had been doing so far, the amount of traveling, the amount of different time zones, the amount of, you know, sort of this concerto marathon, in a sense of, you know, one after another in a short span of time sometimes, which is all very exciting, and such a privilege to have a life where that's what you do. And yet I thought there's something really wonderful about being at home as well. And this kind of stop, this moment of stopping, is when all the thinking, all the reflection can happen.
Karen, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. It was a real delight, and it was a mesmerizing conversation for me about what goes into the musical life and how that's filtered through your experiences. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.